It starts with a shadow behind the stage lights. A man standing alone, shoulders tight, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of another sleepless night, another bottle, another line he swore would help him sing just a little louder. Behind him, a closet stuffed with cash, and beside it, a gun he carried the way other artists carried hope. Before the crowd ever heard his voice, danger had already learned his name. They would later call him Wicked Pickett, a title earned, not given. A voice so powerful it could lift a church, but a temper so sharp it could tear a life apart. He was the kind of man who could bring a room together with a single note, and break it apart just as fast. But how does a boy from the cotton fields of Alabama become both a soul music legend and one of the most feared men in the business? And what happens when the music that saves you is the same thing that destroys you? To understand Wilson Pickett, we must return to the red dirt roads, where his story first began. The story begins long before the fame, long before the nickname, Wicked Pickett. It starts in the small, sun-scorched town of Prattville, Alabama, where the days were measured not by clocks but by how long the cotton row stretched beneath the heat. Wilson Pickett was born there on March 18, 1941, one of 11 children in a family fighting the kind of poverty that leaves no room for childhood. His father sold moonshine to survive, his mother carried a temper that could crack through walls, and the South carried the weight of segregation on every inch of land. In that world, Wilson learned early that life rarely offered softness. Everything had to be taken, never given. He was restless even as an infant. They called him Wiggly because he never stopped moving, twisting, pushing against whatever held him. That energy, half fire, half rebellion, would follow him for the rest of his life. He sang in the church where his grandfather preached, the old wooden floors creaking under the stomp of gospel rhythms. But even gospel couldn't contain him. When his grandfather caught him singing secular melodies, the old man struck him on the head with a Bible. In the South of that era, faith was strict, music was sacred, and young Wilson was already breaking rules. Violence was woven into his childhood like threads in a cotton bag. His mother once hit him so hard with a wooden stick that his arm snapped. He fought on the way to school, fought coming home, fought anyone who challenged him. Even the bus driver had enough and made him walk home instead of ride. But beneath the trouble was a boy forced to grow up too fast. With an empty pantry and too many mouths to feed, Wilson took a rifle into the woods, hunting rabbits for days at a time. Once, he returned with 45 of them, skinned, cleaned, ready for the table. His family didn't call it courage, they called it survival. Yet the danger in him grew as fast as his talent. One day, angry at his older brother James, Wilson pointed his rifle at him in the backyard. It was a moment that showed what would haunt him forever, a quick temper, a quick trigger, a belief that force could solve anything. And still, inside the chaos, there was a voice, raw, beautiful, rising from fields where children weren't meant to dream. He knew he wasn't meant to stay in Alabama. Sharecropping from sunup to sundown, answering to white landowners, living with no hope of escaping poverty, Wilson looked around and understood that the only way out was through the sound in his chest. So at 14, he dropped out of school, packed what little he had, and boarded a bus headed north to Detroit. The city was a promise, factories, music, and a different kind of freedom. Detroit changed everything. His father, now living there after separating from his mother, insisted he return to school. So Wilson enrolled at Northwestern High School, a place buzzing with students who would later shape Motown and American music. Norman Whitfield, Florence Ballard of the Supremes, Melvin Franklin of the Temptations, they all walked those same halls. Talent was everywhere, and Wilson could feel the electricity of possibility. He drifted back into gospel, but this time the city gave the music a sharper edge. He joined the Violinaries, a gospel group that sometimes slipped into secular music under a different name. That double life mirrored Wilson's own struggle, faith on one side, hunger for success on the other. Detroit's church circuit also brought him close to Aretha Franklin and her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, two of the most influential forces in black gospel. Aretha was only 14 then, Wilson 15, both shaped by the music of Sunday mornings and the realities waiting outside the church doors. By the late 1950s, his voice was too big for the pews. He married Bonnie, welcomed his first son, and stepped away from gospel life, convinced that too many churchgoers preached holiness but lived otherwise. If they were imperfect, he figured he had the right to chase his own imperfect dreams. His next leap came from a Detroit apartment balcony. A member of the Falcons heard him singing outside and asked if he wanted to audition. The group didn't want him at first, they said he was too dark-skinned, choosing Marvin Gaye as their preferred singer. But talent speaks louder than prejudice, and Wilson soon replaced Joe Stubbs, brother of Levi Stubbs from the Four Tops and cousin of Jackie Wilson. With the Falcons, he recorded I Found a Love, a soulful explosion that introduced the world to the raw storm inside him. The song hit number 6 on the R&B chart, and the group toured the Chitlin circuit with Sam Cooke and James Brown. James Brown even complained that Wilson stole too much of the crowd's attention. By then, Wilson Pickett knew his destiny. He had survived poverty, violence, and a childhood built on hard earth and harder lessons. He had walked out of Alabama with nothing but a voice, and now the music world was paying attention. But success would not soften him, it would only give his fire a stage. And soon, that fire would set the entire industry ablaze. The rise to greatness rarely comes quietly, and Wilson Pickett's didn't either. By the early 1960s, the applause he earned with the Falcons had grown loud enough to drown out any doubt. Fans felt the urgency in his voice, sharp, pleading, electric. And when people around him began saying he was too big for a group, he believed them. The world outside his window felt ready, even if he wasn't. Going solo was supposed to be a clean break, but nothing in Wilson's life was ever clean. He recorded a demo and sent it to every label he could find. Inside that tape was a song he had written called If You Need Me, a track soaked with longing and gospel grit. Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records loved it, but not enough to sign Wilson. Instead, he bought the rights and gave the song to Solomon Burke. Burke's version became the hit. Wilson watched a piece of his heart climb the charts with someone else's name on it. It was the first time he learned that in the music business, talent didn't always win, contracts did. Still, he wasn't done climbing. Lloyd Price and Harold Logan signed him to their label, where he released It's Too Late and several early singles. But trouble followed him the way a shadow follows light. He fought with club owners, argued over pay, distrusted every handshake. His reputation hardened. Wilson Pickett was gifted, but he was volatile. Genius came with a gun tucked in his belt. And then came the crossroad that changed everything, Atlantic Records wanted him after all. This time, Wexler wasn't letting him slip away. Wilson signed, walked into the studio, and found himself surrounded by writers and producers who wanted him to sing polished pop. But he refused. He wanted the raw sound of soul, the sound he heard in Otis Redding's "Pain in My Heart." He wanted something real. That decision carried him straight to Memphis, into the heart of Stax Records. The moment he stepped into the room with Steve Cropper, Booker T., and the MGs, and Isaac Hayes, the chemistry snapped together like flint meeting steel. What happened next would echo across American music. 6345789, Soulsville, USA, hit number 1 on the R&B chart. In the Midnight Hour, hit number 1 on R&B and crossed into the pop world. More than 1 million copies sold. Grammy nomination. A sound built from the church, sharpened in Detroit, electrified in Memphis. And the irony? He wrote, in the Midnight Hour, at the Lorraine Motel, the same motel where Martin Luther King Jr. would later be assassinated. History was already moving underneath his feet. Then suddenly, success hit a wall, because business always hits back. Jim Stewart, head of Stax, didn't want his staff creating hits for artists not signed to his label. The door slammed shut. Wilson was banned from working with the very people who had helped him rise. But he didn't slow down. He simply moved the storm to Muscle Shoals. At Fame Studios, with another set of brilliant Southern musicians, the hits kept coming. Land of 1,000 Dancers, number 1 R&B, number 6 pop. The Exciting Wilson Pickett, number 3 R&B, number 21 pop. A sound sharper, dirtier, more dangerous, just like him. But while the music soared, something else was brewing, ambition beyond the charts. Solomon Burke formed the Soul Clan, Burke, Pickett, Otis Redding, Joe Tex, Don Covey. Their dream was bigger than hits. They wanted to build businesses, buy property in the South, create jobs, schools, restaurants, black economic power rooted in unity. Atlantic refused to give them the $1 million they requested. Otis died in a plane crash. The dream collapsed. It was a sign of how America treated black brilliance when it gained too much leverage. But Wilson kept moving, kept burning. In 1967, he released The Wicked Pickett. The name came from a moment inside Atlantic. He pinched a secretary on the hip, she snapped, "You wicked Pickett," and Wexler said, "That's it. That's the album title." It was fitting. His music was righteous, his behavior was reckless. Mustang Sally roared up the charts. Funky Broadway became another number 1. His voice dominated radio stations and juke joints from Detroit to Memphis to New York. But behind the microphone, the danger grew louder. Bobby Womack joined his band after the Sam Cooke scandal left him nearly blacklisted. Womack said Wilson was unpredictable, laughing with you 1 minute, ready to kill you the next. If a musician missed a note, Wilson might throw a punch. Or fire a gun. Or both. And yet, he took care of people. He bought houses for his mother. He lent Womack $110,000 in cash with no paperwork, no hesitation. He kept closets full of money because he didn't trust banks. He also kept cocaine close, thanks to Womack, who introduced it to him to numb the pain in his own life. That choice would change Wilson forever. The alcohol sharpened his temper. The cocaine sharpened everything else. Even so, the hits didn't stop. He recorded in Philadelphia with Gamble and Huff, another reinvention. Engine Number 9, Don't Let the Green Grass Fool You, turned into platinum success. He performed at the iconic Soul to Soul concert in Ghana before 250,000 people. On stage, he was unstoppable. Off stage, he was unraveling. But that unraveling belongs to the next chapter. Because the man the world celebrated as a soul legend was about to become someone even he couldn't control. Success doesn't protect a man from himself. By the early 1970s, Wilson Pickett had more hits than most artists could dream of. But fame, for him, was not a guide, only a spotlight shining on wounds he had never healed. Every childhood bruise, every memory of hunger, every fight that shaped him now lived inside a grown man who had money, a gun, and cocaine within arm's reach. The world still heard the legend. But behind closed doors, the storm was winning. The first major break came when he walked away from Atlantic Records. A dispute over money with Jerry Wexler ended the run that had lifted him to the top. RCA offered him $1 million advance, a massive deal for any soul artist at the time. But even $1 million couldn't catch the changes happening in R&B. New voices, Barry White, Stevie Wonder, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, reshaped the genre. Disco was rising. And RCA, busy managing Elvis Presley, had no real plan for a soul singer as raw as Wilson. Without the right team and with his temper worsening, the hits faded. But the violence grew. In 1974, he got into a drunken fight with Rudolph Isley during a hunting trip. When the argument turned physical, Wilson went back to the hotel, grabbed a gun, and fired into their room. The police arrested him, charging him with reckless endangerment and possession of a weapon. RCA dropped him shortly after. The industry now whispered what many already feared: Wilson Pickett was too dangerous to touch. Vegas seemed like a new beginning, but it became the darkest chapter yet. A residency paid him $17,000 a week, but most of it vanished into cocaine and vodka. He was doing drugs for breakfast, drinking until his anger became uncontrollable. His girlfriend Doy Hall, loyal, patient, and trapped, endured beatings that left scars no makeup could hide. On stage he sang like a giant, backstage he was falling apart. The worst part was how predictable the violence became. He insulted Elvis Presley during a show, mocking the fact that Elvis had a bigger room in the same hotel. Within minutes, the Memphis Mafia kicked in the backstage door, warning him they would kill him if he ever spoke Elvis's name again. On another night, he angered a group of mob-connected men. They dragged him outside, ready to bury him in the Nevada desert. Only his manager's desperate intervention saved him. And yet, he kept spiraling. The combination of cocaine, jealousy, and paranoia made him unpredictable. He slapped other men's wives. He fought band members. He fired musicians mid-show. He believed everyone was stealing from him. He carried cash, tens of thousands, stuffed in closets because he trusted no bank, no contract, no handshake. Then came one of the darkest moments, involving his own son. His 14-year-old boy, Michael, refused to use cocaine with him. Wilson forced him. The child was terrified, not of drugs, but of the man demanding it. Teachers wanted to call the police, but Michael begged them not to. He still wanted to protect the father who couldn't protect himself. Motown tried to help, briefly. Berry Gordy believed Wilson still had greatness left, so in 1987 he signed him and released American Soul Man. But the same demons followed him: fights with hotel staff, threats against Motown employees, drunken rages. Then came the breaking point. He punched his new bass player, Kevin Walker, for no reason. Walker didn't run. He didn't cry. He grabbed a metal bar from a hotel towel rack, waited for Wilson to charge, and swung. The blow shattered the bones around Wilson's left eye. Blood poured everywhere. Doctors saved his life but not his vision. From then on, he wore sunglasses not as a fashion choice, but as a reminder of a battle he started and lost. Motown canceled the tour and cut him loose. His career was nearly gone. And still, the arrests kept coming. 1987, he returned to a New Jersey bar with a shotgun after a fight. 1991, too drunk and high to attend his own Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, he barricaded himself at home, refusing to come out. Later that year, he drove a truck across the mayor's lawn, threatened to kill him, nearly ran over a police officer, and got arrested with a hunting knife and baseball bat in the vehicle. Then came the tragedy that could not be undone. 1992, driving drunk, he struck 86-year-old Pepe Ruiz. Police found empty vodka bottles and beer cans in the truck. Pepe Ruiz died from his injuries. Wilson went to prison for a year and completed rehab, but the guilt never left him. Instead of healing, the violence returned. 1996, his girlfriend Elizabeth Trapp ran through the street, bloody, barefoot, terrified, screaming that Wilson had beaten her. Police arrested him again, finding cocaine in the home. His body began to give out long before his spirit could. Bulimia. Diabetes. Kidney disease. Gastrointestinal problems. Doctors begged him to stop drinking. He refused. Soon he could barely walk, barely eat, barely speak. Family had to break into his home after days without contact. They found him on the floor, alone in his own urine, too weak to move. He had once filled arenas. Now he lay forgotten in a silent room. His final months were spent in a nursing facility, fighting illnesses he no longer had the strength to overcome. The storm that had followed him since childhood finally caught him. America has always had a complicated relationship with its musical heroes. And with Wilson Pickett, that tension was sharper than most. On stage, he was the embodiment of soul, an unstoppable force who could lift an audience to its feet with a single scream. But off stage, headlines painted a different picture: guns, assaults, cocaine, arrests, and a temper that frightened even the people who loved him. To the American public, he became both a treasure and a warning. Radio listeners adored In the Midnight Hour and Mustang Sally, yet newspapers chronicled the chaos he left behind: fights in Vegas, clashes with the police, a near-fatal overdose of rage, and eventually, a tragic drunk driving incident that took a man's life. Older black audiences, especially those who had followed him from his gospel days, felt heartbreak more than judgment. They had seen too many gifted men fall victim to addiction and fame. They knew the pressures of being black in an industry built on exploitation. Many whispered the same sentence: he needed help long before the world ever knew his name. In the wider world, his influence stretched farther than his scandals. The soul-to-soul concert in Ghana made him an international symbol of cultural bridge building, showing Africa and America connected through rhythm and history. European fans embraced him long after U.S. labels turned away, celebrating his raw power even as they feared his volatility. Around the world, musicians studied his phrasing, his timing, the way he could bend a note until it felt like it was begging for redemption. But the American media could never fully separate the brilliance from the destruction. To them, he was the man who changed soul music. And the man who threatened a mayor, fought half the industry, and lost himself to addiction. By the 1990s, Wilson Pickett had become a living contradiction. A legend on vinyl, a ghost in real life. Loved, respected, feared, and pitied. His story made America ask a painful question. How do we honor the art when the artist is at war with himself? In the end, the stage lights dimmed for Wilson Pickett long before his heart stopped beating. Years of alcohol, cocaine, violence, and regret carved deep into his body. By the time his family broke into his home and found him on the floor, thin, weak, unable to stand, America had already begun rewriting his story. Not erasing him, but reframing him. Remembering the brilliance. Acknowledging the damage. Trying to separate the two, even when they were woven tightly together. On January 19, 2006, his heart finally gave out. 64 years old. A man who once commanded arenas with a single note now slipped quietly into history. But his voice never left. It lived on in the grooves of vinyl, in the jukebox at the corner bar, in the late-night radio shows that still play, in the midnight hour, like a prayer for anyone searching for something real. His legacy is complicated, yet undeniably powerful. He gave soul music some of its fiercest anthems. He helped bridge black and white audiences at a time when America was still divided by fear. He inspired generations of singers who learned from him how to shout, cry, and testify through a microphone. And even in his chaos, he reminded the world that genius is often born in places where pain and hope collide. After his death, honors continued to pour in. Rock and Roll Recognition. R&B Hall of Fame. In the Midnight Hour, preserved by the Library of Congress as a piece of American cultural history. His biography in the Midnight Hour reignited interest in his life, reminding new generations why he mattered, and why his story is a warning as much as a celebration. But perhaps his greatest legacy is the question he leaves us with. How far can talent carry a man when he cannot escape himself? For older listeners who lived through the soul era, Wilson Pickett is both a memory and a mirror, reflecting a time of struggle, brilliance, and consequences that still echo today. If his songs meant something to you, share that memory. Maybe it was a dance. Maybe it was a road trip. Maybe it was a moment when his voice helped you feel less alone. And if stories like this make you think about the price of greatness, stay with us. There are more lives to honor, more lessons to learn, and more voices, lost and found, that still deserve to be heard. Until next time, keep his story alive.